So, hello everybody, and today I have a very special and not just special but phenomenal guest. And he is Ron McIntyre. And because I fall so short of defining who he is for those who have not known him before, please, Ron, would you introduce yourself to your audience?
Hi, everybody. My name is Ron McIntyre, she said. I basically have been in business for close to more years than I care to count. I've got 25 plus years in retail management and 25 plus years in IT management. So when it comes to business, I've always practiced what I preach. So a lot of what we're going to talk about today is coming from my experience, as well as from the shoulders that I stand on in terms of the people that I've learned from. And it's not just my ideas, it's kind of a conglomerate of what I consider the experts in the field.
So, what's your take on the code of ethics in the world of corporations globally, Ron?
Well, globally, I believe that every company should have a code of ethics. It should be a written code of ethics. It should be something that is a communication between the company and employees, stakeholders of all levels that tells them, here's the integrity that we stand by. Here are our shared values. And the issue that happens is that if I believe the company culture is tied together with the code of ethics, I begin to find a balance. I find employees who appreciate it. There's a trust that builds up between employees and management and leadership. Once you have that trust and the employees are satisfied, then I see that rolling off into the other stakeholders, the customers, the vendors,
Yeah.
the uh, shareholders. It sort of spills over into everybody else, and it winds up being a major communications tool for people to work and improve on the processes within the company. So when I look at external, which is where I always try to look first, is we need to understand customer needs first of all, and we need to understand employee needs internally. So a code of ethics provides us a base to work from. Now you meld that together with culture. Now in my mind, you've got a package that can be worked with.
What do you think? What do you think the code of ethics in corporations are missing right now, or are they? I mean, what do you? How do you see it? What's missing from there?
Well, there's three things that I think are missing. Number one, when a lot of companies write code of ethics, they make it very, very vague. They don't want to commit to something that they think may hamstring them, which code of ethics don't, in my mind. It liberates you more than anything else. The second thing that's missing is that they fall into the trap of, just because I've written a code of ethics, everything's done. And that's not true. I mean, I can't tell you the number of companies I've worked with that they have a code of ethics slapped up on the wall. And if I ask any employees, what does it say? Most of them would say, I don't know. I see it coming in. So it's that difference between writing and living the code. And that we need to get to the point where, that's why culture is so important to this whole formula. Because if you create a code of ethics that people will buy into and participate in, then the culture thrives and people can know that they have outlets. They know what everybody else does. They know how to interact. They know the ground rules of communications. It's puzzling why sometimes we forget that just because we create it does not make it a living document.
How can we promote making it a living document, a living thing?
It is, in my mind, a code of ethics, just like culture is a living thing.
Yeah.
The two married together is basically a formula for being able to engage wherever you are. And adaptability in a global sense means that I can include, and this is where we get into the discussion of diversity and inclusion,
Yeah.
because I need to be able to adapt to other cultures and be able to allow them flexibility as well as myself and my culture, so that we have an understanding on how we work together. Uh, I mean, it's a simple formula when you look at it. I mean, you basically write it, and too many people write it in a vacuum. The leadership gets together in a room and says, okay, what's going to be our code of ethics? So we sit down, we write all the flowery words, and they never ask anybody else within the corporation or within their ecosystem what should be the code of ethics and what makes sense. So they wind up with this document that may be flowery and it may be very symbolic, but it has no life. It's stale. So you release it, you post it on the walls, you send it out in emails, but then you don't have that next step, which is educating the people around you, as well as educating your customers and everybody else that here's what we live by. And that's a big step that's missed. We need to get employees, we need to get customers to read it, but not only read it, understand it, and be willing to participate in it. And that's the big thing. I mean, if you just have if you've just written it and you post it up on the wall and you forget about it, it's useless.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
And so it's one of the things that I encourage examples. And I think the examples need to start with leadership. And so it rolls from the top down, but I also encourage employees to let it roll from the bottom up.
Yeah.
So that you have this balance of interaction with examples of what the culture and what the code of ethics is all about. If you have that balance, then you have a thriving organization.
Yeah. And then what you suggest, they have a set of meetings, for example, the top management with the rest of the people in the hierarchy, and then they discuss them, open questions, and so on until they get to something?
And as far as the creation, I think they need to pull samplings from various parts of the organization, from the root level to all the way up to the senior management. They need to get input from vendors. They need to get input from customers and listen to customers. What are they saying? What are their expectations? And really think through the process of what do we stand for? What are our values going to be when it comes to a customer, when it comes to a vendor? So often we ignore vendors because we think they're just there to give us the best price and
Yeah.
get it out of them. So it's a thorough process in my mind.
Why would vendors be important in that sense, Ron? You think?
Because of the simple fact that they provide you the materials that you need to succeed. And if your success as an ethical corporation can go into their realm of operation, then you're going to get better products, you're going to get better supplies, you're going to get better service, and everything that goes with it. If you treat them as outsiders, then you're going to wind up, you're always going to be in this balance of your ethics versus their ethics, and you're going to find there may be a difference.
And then the client is going to be hit with that difference.
Right.
Yeah. Did you ever go into a situation where you were shocked by how rock bottom the code of professional conduct went? It was so not consistent. It was so, did you ever meet a situation where you couldn't believe what you can see?
Well, I once interviewed for a company. This was when I was in retail. And I went in to interview to be a merchandise manager, which is to oversee buyers. And as I listened to the conversation as we were talking, it all sounded good until we got to little notes like, Well, this buyer's currently in Switzerland because he's on a vendor trip. Or we get gifts from various vendors, and it's a good thing. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that getting gifts is a wrong thing totally. There has to be some limits on it, though. There has to be some guidelines. And the interesting thing was I turned down the offer. And 45 days later, I learned that the entire buying department was being investigated. And some of the buyers had lost their jobs and others were facing criminal investigations. So that's where a situation where it had gotten totally out of hand. The ethics were upside down. Nobody was understanding or controlling what was going on. And there were no standards.
Obviously, yeah, they went beyond the limit, the logical limit in that sense.
Exactly. The interesting thing is the company's no longer around.
Normal consequence for lack of, or, lack of framework.
Exactly. It's one of those things when your selfishness overrides your common sense.
Yeah.
Then you wind up in this ethical dilemma.
Yeah, exactly. They were stuck in an ethical dilemma. Well,
Yeah.
did you ever see the opposite of this, where you walked into a corporation and you were really impressed by how the people, synergized with understanding this framework of professional conduct?
I've been in a number that I really felt they had a good handle on it, both in manufacturing and in retail, as well as IT. And how I was able to tell the difference was you begin to listen to the conversation. And the conversation has words in it like, we need to do this. The customer's expecting this. We need to understand how the vendor needs to do this. We need to build a way for this to transpire across this distance. Everybody understands the big picture of what they're working on. And so the communications flow and it's like a pulse within the organization. And I've actually run stores that was the way it was. I mean, I knew that the retail store would work as well when I was there as when I wasn't there.
Wow.
Because the flow of the communications was always so good that if somebody dropped a ball, somebody else would pick it up and they'd just move on. And I felt the same way with the last team that I was working with in IT. We had a 10-year contract, and that team was, even though we were spread all over the globe, I could trust any part of that team just to pick up and move through the process.
Wow. And they could do it globally.
Yep.
Wow. What's the line between having a healthy culture where everybody's on the same page of how they should be, acting, behaving, and harmonizing both, versus taking that further to wanting to perfect things and not accepting mistakes? What's the line between there, Ron?
That's a very good question, because there is a line. There's a big line between micromanaging and managing for success or excellence. Too many times today, I see people that are micromanaging. They think that they need to know what every person is doing every minute of the day. And if you have people that are that way, then you haven't built the culture correctly. Because people need to understand what they're responsible for, what their level of authority is, what they can do when they run into a problem, who they can go to. They need to be able to have a reasonable way to communicate, even if they fail. And by the way, they need to be forgiven if they fail, because they need to learn from it and grow. If your culture doesn't allow for that type of communication, then you're not going to be able to find this flow and thriving organization that I see so often. It's dependent on leadership being willing to allow employees to participate in decision making. Now, we're not saying it's a democracy, because one person's got to make the decision, usually in a corporation, but the fact remains that they need to have input and feel that their input's being heard.
Yeah.
So yeah, that line is very narrow.
You said where if they fail at a point, the employees or the teams, that they would be forgiven.
Yeah.
Should it be that way, or should it be that mistakes are expected to happen in that sense?
Oh, as far as I'm concerned, William Johnson, who headed a corporation here in the early 1800s, made the statement. He says, if you're not making mistakes, you're not making progress. And he's absolutely right. Mistakes need to be expected. And now, the ideal is that you make the mistake, you learn from it, and you don't repeat it.
Yeah.
Now, there are times that you're going to be what looks like repeating it, but you in fact have made an incremental change and it didn't work. And then you pick yourself up and you go do another incremental change. So it's like the Japanese term kaizen, which is let's make individual incremental changes and make things better.
Yeah, in that sense. So is it possible? Is it right to say that utopian, or like a culture where everybody is exactly, doing what's expected of them in a context of professional conduct, for them to match that and to meet up with that all the time, 100%, that's like too good to be true?
In terms of it, to be a perfect environment, yes, that's impossible. Because what happens when you have a perfect environment, in my opinion, is that you're going to wind up with a lot of uniformity and a lot of non-diversity.
Yeah.
Because everybody will be the same. The idea of a healthy organization is one that has unity. It has unity of purpose, it has unity of thought and unity of values. They use that unity combined with diversity of thought so they can bring number of views to the table when situations arise, and they maximize the amount of ideas that get put on the table.
Absolutely. Was there a situation where you were able to actually develop a cultural context of a corporation that you worked with, Ron? You went in there and you added something that was so obvious for people, and they were so happy that you went in and added it, a value, or an additional idea, or a way of behavior or dealing with each other.
Well, I've kind of always used the same mentality, whether I've run a store or I was running a team or I was within the corporation. I have this very bad habit of saying what's on my mind. And sometimes the person that I'm saying it to may or may not agree with me. and that's fine. That allows for diversity. That allows for exchange to go in. And over the years, I've built a number of teams that I felt had a great pulse. I mean, the last team that I built that I mentioned before was we were separated we had an office in India. In fact, we had two offices in India. We had two here. And for the most part, it was a very synergistic discussion. Now, were the hiccups? Absolutely. You've got to understand that nothing is perfect. So there were always hiccups, there were always challenges to communications, there were always issues that you had to deal with. But for the most part, it was very smooth flowing. And once we started a project, we normally would bring it in on budget and on time, which is what the customer wants. So yeah, I've done it a number of times, and it's great fun when you have that type of organization because you can celebrate it with them. You can have fun at the same time that you're working and not consider it drudgery. And I can't emphasize that enough. We need to have more of that in today's world.
You help them express their real point of views. Is that it? Is that how
Yeah.
you changed the organizations that you worked with?
Yeah, exactly.
You encouraged your teams.
I encourage the teams, but I also dealt with management on how, for example, I keep trying to influence corporations, big corporations, to think, to leverage their size, but think small because they need to become more agile. I've basically been influential in trying to break down silos within corporations. Been relatively successful because we need, although we may need to have a silo for a particular reason, that silo doesn't need to be thick walled.
Yeah.
It needs to be open and porous so that other people can communicate with it.
Yeah. And that's the only way you can actually know whether there is a problem that's going to be coming up, or lack of understanding between teams, or something that's going to pop up in the way.
Yep, that's absolutely right. Business is funny. It's all about details, but yet the details don't drive the strategy. The strategy still needs to be up here. And contrary to popular opinion, culture doesn't need strategy. Culture and strategy are tied together, they're intertwined, as is a code of ethics. And contrary to, at least in my opinion, if you can put these three together along with a vision, you have a solid organization. Particularly when you talk about code of ethics, vision, purpose, strategy, all of them need to be rethought periodically.
Absolutely.
The world changes, society changes, how we deal with people changes. And so all of them need to be living organisms. They need to be living and breathing and evolving. And if you can think far enough ahead, you can really lay the foundation for a strong growth in the future.
Absolutely. What's the biggest, Ron? You have all of these. Of course, I mean, it's obvious you're one of the greatest thought leaders that I have ever met in my life. What's the biggest core value that you have that stands behind all of this, that advocates all of this, that makes you who you are?
I don't know if I can tell you one, because the simple fact that I think there's, again, I stand on the shoulders of guys like Albert Einstein, John Maxwell, Tom Peters, Peter Drucker. I've read all of their books, and I've inhaled a lot of their vibe. And in my world, when I look at values and common core values, the top of my list is always communications. You will never hear me not talk about communications. And go with that goes connections. I mean, we have to have both. If you have a one-way communication, that's teaching. If you want true communication, you need to have connection. And then you have to have listening on top of that. So it's a multi-phase process that people need to look at and really listen to what's being said. Integrity follows that, because that now defines the level and the type of communications that I have. Behind that comes humility, because I screw up. I make
As we
mistakes.
all do. Absolutely.
Yeah, but I learn from them and I grow from them, and I encourage others to make mistakes.
And learn from them.
Exactly. I believe in diversity. I can't emphasize that enough, that so many people have different ideas and different cultures can bring different ways of looking at issues. Now, we may not all agree on them, but at least if we're open enough and open-minded enough to be able to look at and examine them, we may find, heaven forbid, we have a match. We have this spark that comes. Inclusion, I think that goes without saying.
Yeah.
Persistence, this one's kind of a funny one, because I'm noted for being persistent. In other words, I'm a pain. If I have an idea that I want to put across, and if I think it's a good one for the company, I will consistently drop hints that it needs, of how we can do it, how it will affect bottom line, how it will affect sales, how it will affect customers. Adaptability, we've talked about. We have to be adapted today. But finally, and this is the one that I would wrap up in my value side, is there are no silver bullets. There's no low-hanging fruit. There are no quick fixes. It takes work, concentration, and a willingness to learn to resolve issues and build organizations.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Ron, for the wonderful information. And, it's always a pleasure to speak and, talk with you and share all of your ideas. You always open up, new pathways in my thinking. I mean, on my personal level, I'm sure I hope it's doing the same thing with the people who are watching us right now. And do you have any final piece of advice, or like any final thought that you'd like to share with all of the people who are joining us today and watching this episode?
Well, one thing I always used to tell my coaching clients was, learn from the past, live in the present, and anticipate the future. So as long as I can learn from the past, and I can live in the present and be there for the people that I love and the people that I like and the people I work with, then I've got a good life.